Light's completely on.
I'm gonna go talk to him for a minute.
Can I put this on in there?
Okay. If everyone could just mute themselves also, just for right now, that would be super helpful. So during our closure, when we did not open our preschool, we ran the Pathways program, and Noah, our director, who's here, who you all know, encouraged Darcy and me to think big. He said, imagine what pieces of our beloved Gan community need expansion and how we can meet the needs of our community in a deeper and more meaningful way. It made me think of Helen Keller, who said, alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And it's through this process that we created Gan HaMishpacha and Gan HaNeshama. Darcy will speak a little bit about Gan HaMishpacha in a moment, and I'm just going to say a few quick words about Gan HaNeshama. And for those who don't know, Gan HaNeshama is Garden of the Soul, and that is a very meaningful name for me of this center, because I believe that every child is unique and incredibly special and has so much to give to us. And when they're little when they're so little and they need that help, we want to protect their soul and just make sure that they get everything they need. As a young idealist social worker, I learned about early intervention and early detection. And after 20 plus years of doing this work, I still feel very idealist about it, because I do think that understanding what a child needs from a very young age is the most effective approach for long-term outcomes. And all the research on brain development really supports that. Right now, the process could be very overwhelming, confusing, and siloed. And as a parent myself, I know how emotional it can be to think that anything is wrong with your child. And so our hope with Gan HaNeshama is to help parents understand that development is ever changing. And if a child is struggling or showing signs of developmental delays, it's not a life sentence, but rather an opportunity to support what they need right now and change their roadmap for the future. In early childhood development, we look through the lens of domains. We look at motor, we look at language, social emotional, and cognition. And the Multidisciplinary Evaluation Center, which is what Gan HaNeshama is, provides children with an expert in each one of those domains who understands the overlap and how all parts of development work together. And so this is what Gan HaNeshama is. It's a place that we could really give young children what they need if they need it in this moment. And if you have any further questions about it, please reach out to me. If you have any questions about your child's development, I'm your resource, your go-to. You know how to get me by email or pulling me aside in the parking lot. I'm always available, and I'm really excited to open Gan HaNeshama and offer families this service. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say about it for now. We could talk about development for hours. It's my favorite topic, but I am going to pass the mic to Darcy, who's going to talk a little bit about Gan HaMishpacha.
Thanks so much, Steph. Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you. I'm Darcy Lewis. And I'm going to just share with you a little bit about Gan HaMishpacha, or the new family center that we've opened within the Gan ecosystem. As Stephanie mentioned, COVID brought our team the opportunity. Noah encouraged us to think about all of the different parts of the Gan and who joins us and when they join us. And an area of my passion is actually perinatal work. So thinking about pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period. And as a postpartum doula, I had the opportunity to work with many different families as they're growing their family. And together, collaboratively, we thought about how can we welcome families into the Gan before they're even, quote unquote, Gan students. And through reaching out to families, through connecting with moms and dads and families that look like all sorts of beautiful combinations, what we landed upon was that we needed an opportunity to help build our village before the village of the preschool is what developed. And so that's where together we've had the great opportunity to open Gan HaMishpacha, where I, as a postpartum doula and soon to be certified lactation consultant, have the opportunity to offer prenatal courses, postpartum support groups, baby and me classes, and really also connect it to our beloved Gan Kangaroo program, which is taught by Dale Sorcher, our kangaroo teacher of many, many years for children who are 18 to 24 months. And really, as we start connecting with families, even pre-birth, during that prenatal time, we're able to provide support, we're able to provide connectivity, knowledge, a safe place to ask questions, to find out what's going to happen, and to just really have a community to connect with during a time where we would be living in a village if this was a few thousand years ago. So I hope that if you have a child on the way, if you know someone with a child on the way, if you have a new little one, that you'll connect with me, that you'll join one of my groups, and that we can really help to support you, embrace you, and connect you to the Gan and to all of the beauty that is starting a young family. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Darcy.
Thank you.
Okay, so now here we are. What you're all here to hear about. Claire Lerner is an author. This is her book, and you can see that it's really good because I've highlighted many parts of it. I encourage all of you to look at it or buy it. We have plenty of copies at the Gan if you'd like. Claire Lerner has been all things parenting at 0 to 3 for the last 20 years. She collaborates with many area preschools. She owns and runs Lerner Child Development, which you can find at lernerchilddevelopment.com. The most wonderful thing about Claire is besides the fact that she's just an expert in parenting, she is the only person I know of in this area who will enter your home and really help you in the moment with what's happening, and give you hands-on support. And so thankfully, Claire has taken all of her knowledge and put it into this wonderful book, which Noah is now going to ask about in an interview style forum. And so I'm going to pin their Zoom box so that it hopefully will feel like an interview, as if we were in the Gan that we were hoping to be in tonight, but we are here instead. And I'm glad that we are, so that so many more of you could join. So without further ado, I will pass the mic to Noah and Claire, and we look forward to listening and learning. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Claire, it's really lovely to be here sitting next to you tonight. So thank you for making it here tonight. Thank you to our families and our parents for being here. And I have to say also to Darcy, thank you for all the work you do for Gan HaMishpacha, and to Stephanie for the work you've done to get our evaluation center started, and also Steph for putting in so much of the legwork to the logistics for tonight, to connecting us with Claire, and to putting our agenda together for the evening. So Claire, I'm gonna dive right in, and I imagine this is something you gave a lot of thought to as you put your book together. I've been a reader of parenting books actually since before I became a parent, since I've been in early childhood for my whole career. So there's a lot of parenting books out there. My memory goes back to Jennifer Senior, All Joy and No Fun, The Paradox of Modern Parenting. To Julie Lithcott-Hames, How to Raise an Adult, to Emily Oster, who I think some of our Gan preschool families are familiar with. So why another parenting book? What sets your attitude and your content apart, and what can bring our Gan families benefit from checking in with you and from reading the book that you've just put out?
So very, very fair question. It's a question I asked myself because I never set out to write another parenting book. I wrote a few for 0 to 3 years ago. I was just totally focused on my practice and being in the trenches with families, as Stephanie described, and finding, tremendous fortification from that. But what started to happen was I noticed a pattern of many, many families coming to see me still struggling with major power struggles and, real difficulty managing emotions in those triggering moments with kids and, sort of, falling back on bribery and threats and yelling, all things no parent sets out to do. And that, of course, they know aren't, recommended parenting strategies. They all want to be loving parents, right? Who can set the limits and boundaries in a way that helps their children thrive. But when push came to shove, they were still having a really hard time doing that, even after reading many, many, many excellent books. And so I started to sort of pull back the layers and really delve in with parents. What was triggering in those moments that made it hard for them to be the parent they wanted to be and to practice what they had read about? And I started to identify some very persistent mindsets that got in the way of parents being able to follow through, to remain calm, to remain empathetic, but to set the limit on a bedtime routine or coping with not having chocolate at Trader Joe's. And so the book lays out these 8 mindsets. I know we'll have a chance to talk about some of them, maybe not all of them. But what I do in the book that's different is it's not theoretical. It's very, very practical. Many books talk a lot about theory and what we know kids need, but it stops short of what do you do when your child is, scratching you and hitting you and falling out in the middle of the Gan parking lot, comes in out of their room 50 times. And so what my book does is I show through case after case how I helped parents get in tune with these mindsets that were getting in the way, making mind shifts, and then solving these problems. And I show that in all its gory detail. And so it provides a roadmap for other parents to see, how we solve that problem and how we made amendments and, sort of corrected things that weren't going well, tried certain things and learned from them, so that it's sort of the one size fits all book. It's really about how do you puzzle through your unique situation to come up with solutions that actually enable you to be a loving limit setter, which is what I think really what kids need at the end of the day. So that's my long-winded response.
Ending on a loving limit setter. I'm just taking some notes as we go. Loving limit setter. So there's a lot in there, Claire, right? You started with emotions and bribery and power struggles, which I think is where we all sit as parents, right in there. Often we're asking ourselves, I didn't enter parenthood meaning to bribe my child or meaning to raise my voice so frequently or meaning to show so many emotions. It sounds like you've worked it sort of from the inside out, rather than taking the theory from the ivory tower of academia or from pure developmental research. You're sitting in families' living rooms, you're hearing from mothers and fathers, and you're taking sort of their practical situations and responding to what they need. And from there, you built, as you said, your mindsets. So I've had the privilege of reading the book. I imagine most of our attendees tonight have not had a chance yet since it did just come out. So when you say mindset, if you could sort of walk us through, what do you mean when you say mindset? And give us maybe 2 or 3 examples of what a mindset is, and along the way, sort of how you develop those mindsets. Where do they come from in that sort of inside out perspective? So what is a mindset? Give us a couple examples and how you arrived at it. Okay.
So you'll see as I start to talk about them that they're all very interconnected. So a lot of them are sort of, there's a confluence of faulty mindsets that come into play in these difficult moments. So I think the easiest way for me to do it is maybe to tell a story, like a case right out of the book, right? Okay. So a mom and dad come in, they have a very feisty, clever 3-year-old. And literally the dad walks into my office, and when I had an office, and I ask about what brought them there. And he says, we have a fascist dictator living in our home. She is the CEO of our family. I don't know how this happened, but she's very manipulative and she's running the show and we've lost total control. Like that, in a nutshell, that's pretty much what he said. So I said, okay, tell me more. Tell me what this looks like in real life with your child. So here was the classic situation. You know, they have dinner, they have their book reading time, literally the time between dinner for most families I see and bedtime, maybe an hour and a half. But every single night when they said goodnight, 2 minutes later, she would start screaming that she was starving and she needed them to come up and give her more food. Okay, so that's when the triggers start to get elicited, right? So they hear their child is hungry. They feel like that would be an incredibly mean parent to deny your child food when they're saying they're hungry. So they're annoyed though, because they just had dinner an hour ago, but they feel very stuck and they're worried about the tantrum and they're worried about, you know, her feeling abandoned by them, right? So right there, you have certain mindsets, right? The mindset that was most prevalent for these parents was that, you know, setting a limit and not giving her what she said she wanted was mean. Like at a cellular level, it felt mean to them to say, no, there's no more food. Okay. So caught in that then there's a cascade of reactions that ensue, right? So they go upstairs, but they're annoyed. So they're frustrated and they're like, you should have eaten more dinner, but fine, you know, here's your cheese stick, right? So in her mind, this is a win. And here's the next mind shift. She's not being manipulative, right? They're angry at her because they feel like she's being manipulative, when really she's just being strategic. Okay, so that's another mind shift. So the first mind shift is setting limits is loving, and we'll get to that, like how I helped them set a limit that was loving and not to fear her tantrum. That the tantrum, when kids don't get what they want, is not inherently harmful to them. It's all in the way you do it, and you'll see what that looks like when I tell the solution. But for now, that was a major mind shift they had to make, was that she's, you know, she's not being manipulative. She's just being strategic. What 3-year-old wants to separate at bedtime? That's just a totally unrealistic expectation. I've never met a child in 33 years who said, you know, mom and dad, it's really time for you to leave and end stories. So, and to separate so I can get a good night's sleep. Like that never happens, right? So she's figured out a way to keep the connection going because she loves her parents. They have a great relationship. It's all rooted in a lot of goodness, but things fall apart because she makes a demand. They feel caught. So now they're bringing her food every night, but they're angry at her and they're yelling at her. And they're saying, if you ask one more time, you know, there's no TV tomorrow. And the cascade of threats to try and get her to get with the program and stop asking for food. That's another mind shift right there. You have no control over your child. Like that's one of the most humbling things nobody tells you when you get into parenting. You can't make her not ask for food, right? That's in the DNA of a toddler. I'm going to try all sorts of strategies to pursue my agenda. That's not misbehaving. That's not being a bad kid. When you stop trying to control your child, which you can't do, they can't make her stop asking for food, and started to focus on what they could do, to what limits they could put in place to control the situation, that's when everything started to change, right? So now where we're at is you have an amazing kid who's super clever. She adores you. She doesn't want to separate from you. And she's totally figured out a way to keep that connection going. All great. You don't have to be angry at her. She's not a bad kid. What she needs is clear limits and boundaries to shape her behavior and making better choices. But it's not by insisting she stop asking for food, because that's an automatic, I'm going to keep asking for it because you don't control my voice. So given those insights, we made a plan, and here was the plan. I'm just going to call her Shayna. They said, Shayna, here's the deal, sweetie. We are going to tell you exactly what our evening plan is so you can make the best choice for Shayna. We're going to get home. We're going to have this much playtime. We're going to have dinner. That is our main meal. That is the time for you to choose to fill your belly with all the growing foods it needs. Then we're going to have book time. And here was the added piece, and it's very important. I sensed from this mom and dad that it was going to be very hard to set the limit and not go back in and give her food if they did give her one last chance to eat. So we came up with this last chance food strategy where at book time, they said to her, you will get a small snack. And that's important because you're not going to want to give her a huge, a lot of food, because then there's no incentive to eat dinner. So they said, dinner is the main thing. That's when you get a chance to eat, meat and vegetables and fruit and all this great stuff. The bedtime snack, we're going to tell you every night exactly what it is. So we gave her a menu. This is dinner. What you can look forward to is at bedtime, you can have, 3 apple slices or a cheese stick, like something that's healthy and that's minimal. And then after we say goodnight, there is no food till morning. It's your voice. You can ask for it. We can't stop you from asking for it. By the way, that's a very powerful strategy to diffuse the power of asking for it by saying it's okay. You can call for anything you want, but what you need to understand is after lights out, we're not coming back. That's the time for your mind and body to get to sleep. And the next meal will be breakfast. If you choose not to eat much dinner and you choose not to have the snack, your belly might be hungry and you can make a different decision tomorrow. So they implemented it. And of course, this is what the clever 3-year-olds do. They tell her the story. She's like, great, sounds like a great plan in theory. She eats some dinner, not a ton. They start to read books and they're like, remember, Shayna, this is last chance food. And she's like, oh, I'm not really hungry right now. And they're like, okay, no problem. And lo and behold, literally 10 minutes later, it's lights out and she starts screaming that she's hungry. And they towed the line. It was excruciating. That is very, very difficult. You just have to put it out there. It's very hard to hear your child screaming that they're starving and not reacting. But now they had a very different mindset. They understood that they had given her great choices. They had offered her lots of wonderful opportunities, and that they were having a hard time setting the limit because they thought it was mean. But actually not having the limit is what made them mean, because they went up there angry and annoyed and frustrated because she wasn't getting with the program and she was making them feel out of control, like she was the boss of them. Once they had a clear limit that they could control, they were much more loving, and they could enjoy their bedtime. Bedtime used to be very tense and unpleasant because they were just waiting for that other shoe to drop, that they weren't going to get their glass of wine and have their 2 hours to bond or watch, Succession or whatever they're watching on TV. They were always anxious about this continued chaos after bedtime. Now they felt loving towards her. They weren't frustrated. They enjoyed their bedtime routine. And after 3 nights, she stopped asking because she had bumped up against the boundary. She adapted. She started eating more dinner. She started having the bedtime snack if she wanted it. And there was way more connection and love. So what you see from that example is one of these counterintuitive things for parents, which is that limits are loving. It's not love. It's not like you're loving your child or you're limit setting. Like, it's all part of the same thing. And if you don't have a clear boundary and an idea about where the limit is, that is when things spiral completely out of control and we get really mean with our kids. And that's what's detrimental. Helping them accept a limit is loving to them. It's not, it's harmful not to have the clear limit.
Wow. Okay. So thank you, Claire, for that. I hope that along with me, all of the parents who are with us tonight just felt a sense of your stress melting away, at least temporarily, until you're back to parenting tomorrow, because a lot of that rung so true for me, Claire. Katie Rakusin put in the chat just here that they just gave Leo a cheese stick. And if you could hear the floorboards creak above me, my wife Shira is upstairs doing bedtime with our kids, and Solomon, our 4.5-year-old, flat out refused to eat dinner tonight. And I'm sure she's going through some of these same sort of bedtime struggles around parenting. But there's so much in there that's so helpful for us to hear as parents, Claire, right? So tantrums are not harmful. Great to hear. Really great to hear. I think so much of yes, go ahead.
Giving into the tantrum is harmful. Like
right. And so, you know, I think a lot of our parental worries in American culture, in East Coast metropolitan parenting culture, comes from this sense of more is better, bigger is better, and so more money is better when we're at work, and giving more things to our kid is better when we're at home. Coddling them, giving them this when they ask for it, and you're letting us know that actually the limit is where the love is found in there, not exclusively, but that the limit itself can be loving. I heard a child parent therapist a few years back refer to some of what you're describing here as the dance, that it takes two to tango, and each time you engage in the dance with your child, they take one step and then you take the corresponding step, and all of a sudden, before you know it, they're crying, you're screaming, nobody's happy, and you don't even know how you got there, but you followed the same dance. And I think what you're introducing to our parents here, Claire, is these mindsets to disrupt that dance, to sort of stop you from going down that road. And then something also about bedtime, just before we move on. Darcy had mentioned in her intro here about the changing families over the millennia and the way that the nuclear family is so isolated. Bedtime, I've always been curious about, Claire. My background is I've done some sort of ethnographic research on children and childhood, and so it's always fascinating for me what we do as modern American parents is isolate children in their bedroom and then remove ourselves from the situation, which, as you're saying, Claire, and I really hope everyone's taking Claire's words to heart here. Children's behavior around all of that is normal and typical and expected for them. They're not designed to separate from us as night. They're designed to be with us throughout all of this. So when they're having their tantrum, or when they're asking for more things, or when they're not comfortable leaving us, that's all what they're supposed to be doing. It doesn't indicate that we've messed up as parents or that we're doing the wrong thing as parents. We just need to find, through Claire's wisdom here, some strategies to show them that actually this is indeed what is happening. And so, Claire, that sort of like segues into our next question here. You have a couple things in your book that I want to piece together here. One is this idea of two great choices, which for me was an eye-opener as a teacher and as a parent. So if you could open up what that means. You've given us an example of it already, but if you could explain that phrase to us, two great choices. And for me, at least, tell me if I'm misreading you here, but that connects very closely to areas in your book where you contrast choices with direction. And I think as parents and also as teachers, that's a very nuanced distinction that we struggle with applying. So if you could talk us through two great choices and the distinction you draw between directions and choices.
Okay, so they're separate but connected, and I'm very happy to see that my esteemed colleague Jenny Gorski is in attendance, because actually a lot of what I learned, especially about the importance of being clear with kids about what's a choice and what's a direction, came directly from her work and her colleagues at TCA's Kids. So let's just start with that. And actually this became one of the mind shifts that I identified, was that I would go on home visits, and this is what would happen over and over again, is a parent would say, it's time to get in pajamas, okay? Oh, don't you want to get in the bath? A lot of asking questions when it really was meant to be a direction. Like, it really wasn't a choice, right? It was, it's time to get in the bath. It's time to get our pajamas on. And kids get very confused by that because they hear it as a question, and they hear that parents are waiting for their buy-in, which means that they are completely in charge, right? As Jenny and her her team says that the child's driving the car, which is not the way it's supposed to be. Parents, and so when I start to ask parents about what makes them do that, the insight they have is that they feel like they're being a fascist dictator, like an authoritarian parent, if they're telling their child what to do. So instead, they're sort of pussyfooting around it by asking, hoping against hope that the child's going to say, great, I'd love to put my pajamas on, but here's what I hear every day. Oh, I'm not ready yet. I need more time. I still have to do this with my cars. I still, need to do this with my stuffed animals. And that's when things start to fall off the rails, right? Because now the parent's like, no, we don't have time for that. They start to get revved up. The child picks up on that. And now you have this sort of escalating intensity and the power struggle just explodes. It is much more loving to say to a child, it's now time to get in the bath. You have two great choices. Would you like to do that on your own? Or I can be a helper, which would you like? So you see how they're interconnected. First, you make very clear to the child, this is the expectation. Kids want to know what to expect. It's very confusing to them when the expectations aren't clear. And by the way, that is one of the main reasons why, for many of the families I see, the kids are superstars at school. And what parents call them is terrors at home. Oh, Miss Stephanie says, he's the most empathetic kid and he's always helping everyone. And he's the first one to line up and he's the first one to put things in his cubby and clean up and he helps and all of that. And that's largely because schools, in some ways, like a military operation, like in a positive way, in order to run an effective, calm group, the teacher needs to be very clear about what children need to be doing. And that's what makes them feel safe. And so that's one big mindset shift. Is it's very helpful to kids to say, it's time to get in the car. That is a have to. It's my job as daddy to make sure that you get to the Gan on time and I get to work on time. That's a have to. What's awesome is you have two great choices. If you want to be in charge, then you can get in the car however you like. You can hop like a bunny, you can run like Roadrunner. That's one great option. If you choose not to, no problem. I'll be a helper and I'll help you in the car. It may feel uncomfortable, right? Like you may not like me picking you up, and I don't want to do that either, but we need to get in the car. So you decide. And often what I'll say to a kid is, this is such an important decision. I'm going to give you a whole minute to think about, like, what's a better choice for Josh? Is it to go on your own and be in charge? Or is it to have daddy be a helper to get you in? Okay. I do have to say that a lot of parents say to me, okay, Claire, well, why do you call it two great choices when it's really like one good choice and one not so good choice? And the reason is not so much for the child, but for the parent, because often what's happening is parents, their knee-jerk reactions to start to threaten. If you don't get in the car, I'm going to have to pick you up and put you in, and then there's going to be no toys later, and there's going to be no Paw Patrol later, and all the threats start to cascade to try and get the child to change his mind, right? So in this model, we're turning threats into choices and simply saying, if you choose not to, then the other option is I'm going to be your helper. So it's less likely to lead to a power struggle for two reasons. One is that you have an end game, and that's what's so critically important. If you're using threats and bribes to try and get your child to comply, like that's it. If you don't get in the car right now, you have no screen time when you get home later. Well, I can't tell you how many of the feisty kids I work with who look their father in the eye and say, oh, I don't care about Paw Patrol later. And they keep running. Then where are you? So it's not helpful to leave the outcome in their hands. So the two great choices is always one, they make the right choice and they get their shoes and socks on, or they get into the car seat, or they give you back the tablet. And option two is an end game that you control, so you don't get stuck in that deadly gray zone, and you can stay calm because you have a plan to move your family along. And that's what's most important is if you have an end game, you can stay calm and loving. That's what your child needs. You don't then fall into the bribes and the threats that just gets everybody's haunches up and cascades into the exact thing you were trying to avoid to start with.
Yeah, so the bribes and the threats are, they're so hard to stay away from as parents. It's almost like a drug, right? It's like the easy course. And it seems to be successful at first, but it never ultimately is. And I just want to pick up on one thing you said in there, Claire, about the child who in Miss Stephanie's class follows the rules and washes her hands and sits still at snack time and cleans up at the end, and then comes home and refuses to do any of that, to wash hands, to sit at the dinner table, or to clean up her room before bedtime. My first year as a classroom teacher, I was teaching 3-year-olds, and I had a mother and father come in for a birthday celebration back in the good old days when parents could come into classrooms. And they said, Noah, how do you have 12 3-year-olds all sitting at the table at the same time with their knees underneath the table, with their hands on the table eating the snack? Because they can't do that with one child at home. There were 2 phrases in the book, Claire, that struck me as, oh man, she's like giving away all of our secrets as early childhood teachers in the classroom. One is, and it comes back to, you know, the threats that you're saying here. We don't give threats in preschool, of course. So your phrase here is direct, don't correct, and also use first, then language. And so we do all of that in our preschool, right? Darcy and Stephanie have coached for a number of years, our Gan teachers on this. And so for our parents out there, 2 quick examples, one for direct, don't correct. One of Darcy's favorite is, instead of seeing a child running down the hallway, instead of saying, oh, we don't run at school, we say, we use walking feet, right? We're directing instead of correcting. And instead of that threat of, if you don't do this, then I'm taking away that, we'll say, when the classroom is clean, first we clean the classroom, then we go to the playground, right? Sort of staying in control of the out game here. The problem though, Claire, and I guess this is the question for you here is, as teachers, we have our colleagues and we have our administrative support team. We have folks like Stephanie who are experts in their field to sort of coach us through, and we have our weekly meetings, we have our professional development to remind our teachers about this. How have you found parents out there without all of that, just in the isolated home? How have you found parents to successfully remember these mindsets and work it into their practice, so that it comes to life off the pages of the book and actually becomes manifest in their homes?
Yeah, so that's a big question and a very important one. So I'm going to try and succinctly describe the process I suggest to parents to pause enough to think through what's in front of them and get clear on what mind shifts they need to make in order to respond in an effective way, right? So what I would say is, let's just take the dinner table one, right? Even though I know it's charged, because anytime it has to do with food, it's very triggering, but at the risk of that, here's a very classic scenario, right? You say it's dinner time and your child's obfuscating and they're playing, and the parent spends the entire time nagging, cajoling, you need to come to the dinner table. If you don't come to the dinner table now, you're going to be hungry. If you don't come, we're going to take all the toys away. Again, you're in that gray zone, hoping against hope that one of your threats or nags or bribes is going to get your kid to come sit at the table, right? So the first mindset I would say to a parent is, in this little scenario in front of you, like your goal is to get them to the table. What do you control in this situation? That's the threshold question. So you pause and you say to yourself, what can I do to scaffold this situation that I control to make it more likely my child will do what it is my expectation is, right? So if you have a kid who's no longer in a high chair or in a booster seat where they're literally not locked into the table, the first thing you have to say to yourself is, I don't have the power to make my child sit at this table. And if you've got especially a 3 or 4-year-old who's all about power, the more they get wind that you're dying for them to come to the table, the more fierce they are about defying it, because that then defines their power. Or they do what one dad called extortion, which is they say, I'll come to the dinner table, but only if I can have the iPad and watch, Daniel Tiger. So you want to get clear on what you control. Okay. So in this situation, here's what I suggest a parent do. The first step is you say out loud, we've asked Noah to come to the dinner table because it's dinner time and we love when he's here, when we want to share our food, but he's having a hard time following that direction. So let's see what our choices are. And by the way, I suggest parents do this out loud. It's very powerful. And if
I loved reading that in the book also. To self-talk it out loud was very powerful to read about as well.
Right. So I'm going to play it out soup to nuts. And I do this over and over in many of the cases in the book. So let's say you've got two parents. Okay. So let's say it's you and me, Noah. I might be like, oh, Dad, we've asked Josh to come to the table. He's having a hard time following that direction. Let's take a minute to think about how we can help with this. So Josh is a human being. We can't actually make him sit at the table, right? And you're like, yeah, right. We can't make him do that. But I think what we can do is let him know exactly how much time we have for dinner. And we'll use our time timer. Also, thanks to Jenny. I'm sure many of you know time timer, but it's the greatest tool known to man. And you put on time timer and it shows the kids exactly how much time through through the red. So they can see, and you say, oh, we have half an hour. We have 30 whole minutes for dinner time. So our job is to put great food on the table and to have great dinner time conversation. Josh's choice is to come and eat and fill his belly. That's one great option, and his belly will feel good and we'll have shared stories. That's one great option for Josh if he chooses that, or he chooses not to. But what Josh needs to know is that once time timer goes off, dinner's over, and that's the last chance for food. So if he chooses not to come to the table, then his belly might be a little angry at him. He may be a little uncomfortable, and he can have a big breakfast. And that is literally what you do, because when you are chasing your child, trying to get them to do, this is my Psych 101 little diagram. The more you try and get, especially if you have a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old who's all about power, the more you try and get them to do something, they either dig in their heels or move backwards, because they actually care more about power than anything. And they will not eat crow, no pun intended. So coming to the table then becomes giving in. So you have to not make it your agenda and show how much you want them to come. Instead, you're helping them understand what their choices are and what the outcome of those choices will be. And then you have to get comfortable letting them live with their choices, because what happens is if you stick with it, after 2 or 3 nights, they're sitting at the table because they're no longer getting any power out of it, because you're not chasing them, you're not bribing them, you're not nagging them. And the outcome for them is not pleasant because their belly ends up being hungry. And so they start to make a better decision because they've bumped up against the boundary. So the idea is you look at the situation, you pause, you either talk out loud to yourself or to your partner, you talk through the situation, you come up with the 2 great choices, and then you implement it and you stick to it, because then there's no more power struggle. So it's the same thing, around a tablet. Oh, we've asked Samantha to turn the tablet off and give it back. She's having a hard time following that direction. Let's see, what might her 2 great choices be? Well, we can't make her give it back. She's a human being. But I guess her 2 options could be she chooses to give it back and then she gets her iPad time later, or she chooses not to, and then we might have to, take it out of her hands. That may feel really uncomfortable, but iPad time is over. That's a have to. And then Samantha won't be able to have her iPad time later, because that's part of our rules, that if you use the iPad, you have to give it back when you're done. And if you choose not to, then you miss out on your next iPad period. So you have to think through what the 2 great choices are. You need to give yourself time to think about it. And the absolute most critical thing is that you have an end game. You're not waiting and hoping against hope that she's finally going to agree to hand over the iPad.
Right. And you're starting there with something that's just hard for us with the pace of life, with pause, right? You said pause first, before you can sort of collect your thoughts and walk down the path. And there's something else in there that I think is really important for us to just reflect back on for a second, Claire, which is similar to what you said about children crying and throwing a tantrum, that behavior is not harmful to the child. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so tell me if I'm misinterpreting, but it's okay for a young child to go to bed hungry, as long as it's not chronic. And I don't want to make light of childhood poverty where children might be going through acute stress at home. But if a child is given dinner to eat and chooses not to eat it, that you're telling us tonight, it's all right for us. We shouldn't go to bed with the guilt that our child has a hungry belly. Instead, we should go to bed knowing that we set the limit and followed through on it. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, well, it's a little more complicated than that. So let me just say with the first example, that had nothing to do with food. That was simply like, she knew it was a trigger for her parents and that it was a free ticket to get them back in her room engaging with them.
Right.
What I would say, what I have learned through all these years is if you have a healthy child where food is not a major issue, then setting limits around it is absolutely critical and the healthiest thing to do, because what we find is that power struggles over food actually lead to eating less, because food becomes weaponized, and their desire to remain in control and withhold eating because they know that they can wield power from that. That's actually what happens. They actually eat less. We're trying to de-weaponize food by saying our job as your mom and dad is to give you all these amazing opportunities to eat lots of great foods. If you choose not to eat it and your belly is hungry, then you can have a great big breakfast. So we're never depriving kids of food.
Right.
So for a typically developing child who likes food, who doesn't like hate food, that's a totally different thing. What happens is they bump up against the limit, their choice is no longer working for them. And that's when they start to come to the dinner table and eat, because there's no more power in refusing to come to the dinner table. So I actually find in almost every case, the child actually eats more. So I think what you're tapping into, Noah, is critically important though, because that is the trigger. Oh my God, I'm starving my child. Right. If in the cases I just described, the tantrum was really more about not getting their way, not having the parent come in and give them more food or extend mealtime for another half an hour. And, you know, to decouple the eating and the tantrum issue, typical tantrums over, you know, you not reading 10 more books to them or giving them a half an hour more screen time or giving them an extra dessert. That's where grit and resilience is built. Of course, what child is going to like that limit? They're going to fall out to different degrees, to different lengths of time, depending on their temperament. But if you can say to your child, I know, I totally get it. You're so mad at mommy right now because I won't give you another donut. And I totally get it. And I don't expect you to like my rule at all. But that's a mommy daddy rule. And we limit sweets because you need more growing foods. And if you need to be angry, no problem. When you're done being upset, I can't wait to help you find a piece of fruit. Or I can't wait to help you make a magnetile tower. That is the most loving thing you can do for a child, is say, you can have your upset. The more you try to talk them out of it, cajole them out of it, cheerlead them out of it, the more power it has, usually the longer they last. And we're also inadvertently saying to our child, we don't think you can deal with this limit, right? We have to make it all better in some way. Saying to them, you can have your upset. In a very powerful way, you're saying, you can tolerate that. You can be upset. And then at some point they'll pull themselves together. And at that point you'll say, wow, you did a really good job. You were really disappointed that you couldn't watch another episode of, you know, Dora the Explorer. And you managed it. And that's really awesome, because that is where the grit and resilience is built, in learning that they can manage upsets, they can manage disappointments, right? Those are the kids parents want when they go to school and they can't be the line leader or the snack helper. They've learned how to manage and to cope with those disappointments and to accept alternatives, or to be able to wait to be the line leader 3 days later. And that's what makes children happy. Happy children are not always happy. That's another one of my mantras. If you want your child to always be happy, you are going to live in fear of the tantrum. So you're going to be giving in a lot. Your child's going to have a very hard time learning to accept limits. And those power struggles are just going to get amplified and get more protracted and worse.
So one note in there, and then I'm going to pause and we'll sort of open it up here. I know Stephanie's been pushing me to open up for questions, but you got into the psychology of it for a second there, Claire, that, and this is something we know as early childhood practitioners and as parents, but that there's this paradox of, if you want your child to do something, kind of ignore it and don't keep asking them to do it. Don't keep pushing them to do it. And so in our classrooms at the Gan, one of the things that we've been coaching our classroom teachers on is to join in and to do some of the cleanup in the classroom, so that we're not always sort of finger pointing to the children. Make sure to clean this up. Make sure we're modeling for them what good cleanup looks like, and then they join in and join in. And I'm thinking it's similar to what you're describing at the dinner table here, that instead of ratcheting up the power struggle, the scene that you're describing is that the parents, they talk it through, and ultimately the event is people eating food at a table. That's what the child sees dinner as. They connect the concept of dinner with actually sitting, eating, chit-chatting, instead of connecting the concept of dinner with the ratcheting up of the power struggle. So it's that paradox, and then it's the modeling.
And actually, the beauty of it is, that's where they want to be most of the time. Where they're getting stuck is the power is in the defiance. And they don't, it's the same thing. We're not going to go into a whole potty learning thing, because that's a whole nother, that's probably a day-long discussion, but that's often the same thing at play. They want to come to the table. They want to participate.
Right.
They want to use the potty when they're ready, but they get paralyzed by it because they're so motivated by the control,
Right.
that if they gain any power from defying coming to the table, that supersedes everything. It seems insane, right? Like they would care more about doing that than joining in this great family mealtime. But that's where the confusion comes. So once you extricate yourself from that process and no longer give them that fodder to react to, that's when they start to come. But just my last word on that is, when they do come, don't make a big deal out of it. If you start saying, oh, we're so glad, Darcy, that you can, they are going to go running for the hills, because these kids don't want to eat crow. And if they feel like the optics are that they've given in,
right.
They go, you literally just integrate them. You keep talking, oh, what the funniest thing that happened to you today? And eventually you turn to them, oh, what about you? Nothing funny happened. Okay, no problem. If you think of something later, we can't wait to hear about it. You don't take the bait, especially from these really, really provocative kids who will do anything. They will try and draw you into the power struggle. You don't have to do the dance. You don't have to partner with them on that. And that's really what the book does, is give you the roadmap and the tools to have a different response, so that you're setting those loving limits and your child starts to make much better choices that makes everybody much happier.
So thank you, Claire. I have all of my notes here, and there's like a billion more questions. I was even hoping that we would get to public tantrums. That was one of my favorite parts of the book, and to your remarks on screen time and to potty as well. But I will pause there. If folks want to put out any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself or put it through the chat. So I'll sort of cede the floor to the parents in the crowd here, and see what pieces of Claire you'd like to ask about next.
Hi, sure. I'll take no up on his very generous offer to pick your beautiful mind. How do you recommend teaching the younger children, the younger siblings, of a kiddo, of the older sibling who likes to engage in this power dynamic beyond the modeling that you're suggesting? And perhaps that older child has special needs or not, but is that kid who likes to kind of push those little triggers. How do you recommend speaking to or engaging with the younger children to help them understand that that behavior is not okay for them?
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is the older child is provoking a lot of power struggles, and you're concerned about your younger child sort of witnessing them and what sense they're making of this encounter with your older child. Is that right?
That's right. And how to explain to them through modeling, but also if modeling sometimes is just not an option, is there a way to engage with them to explain that that behavior is not okay?
Yeah, so I think it's a two-pronged answer. I would say that when you approach the the power struggle in the way I'm describing, in and of itself, it's a powerful role model for the other child because you're actually not participating in it. So, your older child says, if you don't read me 3 more books, I'm never going to go to sleep. And in this model, you say, but I totally get it. It's never going to be enough books. It's really hard to say goodnight at bedtime, but that's our rule. I'm saying my loving goodnight mantra. I can't wait to see you in the morning. And your child then has his knockdown, drag out tantrum, right? Because you're not giving him what he wants. Remember, not what he needs. The limits is what he needs, but you're not giving what he wants and he falls out. Okay, let's just say that's the scenario for time's sake. The younger sibling, is watching this. What I might say is, I know it's, what, brother, it's really, really hard for him when he can't get something he wants. It's just really tough. It's never going to be enough books. So he may need to be upset because he's disappointed. But that's what we do in our family, is help kids learn to manage when they can't get what they want. So you're sort of both modeling it by enacting it with your older child. And what you're doing with the younger child, and this is the real art of it, is you're helping him understand what he's witnessing while not throwing the older child under the bus. So it might be like, Sarah's still working on that. She's got really, really big emotions. And when something doesn't happen the way she wants it, it's really, really hard. And mommy and daddy are her helpers in helping her learn how to manage that. So it's sort of both of those responses on your part as the parent is what provides the very powerful role modeling really for both kids.
That's really helpful. Thanks.
Emily, thank you for asking the question. I'm taking notes as a parent on that one too, with some sibling stuff going on at home. And Claire, I mean, you get right back into your mindsets here, right? What you're doing now as a mom or dad is you're telling your toddler, the younger sibling, essentially, it's okay for your big sibling to have a tantrum, but I, as the parent, am not going to get rattled by it. I'm going to stick with the outcome that I wanted. I'm not going to sort of give in to all of this. And that's, again, sort of focusing, like you said, Claire, on what you can control, right? Emily, as the mom, can't control the outburst of the older child, but can control how many books she's going to be reading at bedtime. So there's another question from Hannah just came in. So Claire, if you want to read in the chat, or I'll read it out loud. But Hannah said, what about trying to get a kid to bed earlier than she wants or not wanting to nap? And I know that you covered this in your book, Claire. So she says, and her not wanting a parent to leave the room saying, I'm scared in here. Certainly something that all of us as parents have felt. So Claire, we'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, sort of. So I feel the need for a disclaimer because, and I should have said this in the beginning, these are very complex issues and I'm fully aware of that. So like in a consult, we can get totally into the weeds. I can understand your child's temperament and understand the family dynamics. And there's so many pieces of the puzzle I need to understand about, what the napping issue is. What all the dynamics are that have grown up around this dynamic. And so that's all to say that when I answer these questions, I'm really doing it more globally, and it's not going to get to, for many of you, like there's going to be a lot of yes buts, but this is what happens and that's what happens. And like Noah said in the book, there's a chapter on this where I go in very deep on many cases and also on the blogs on my website. But to answer your question, writ large, what I would say is that what you want to get clear on, and I'm going to go back to that mantra that just because your child wants something doesn't mean that what she needs. And that's really the job of the parent. It's why kids have parents, because we do know better. So while your child may want to go to bed at 9 o'clock, if you as the parent know that that's too late and it doesn't serve her because she doesn't get enough sleep, or maybe you have a child who gets into bed and then is up for half an hour, playing and talking to themselves before they fall asleep, that's your job. So it might go something like this, right? It might go something like, Jordan, I totally get it. You want to stay up later, and I understand fully why you would want that. But my job as your mom is to make sure your body gets the sleep it needs. That's what the doctor's been very clear, that even if you don't like that, that's what we are going to do. So bedtime is going to be at 8 o'clock. And what we can do is talk about the things you want to do before lights go out. So I'm big into baking into the sleep plan important things for your child. This is not like fascist dictating. And, I don't have time to go through it in a short form, talk like this. But for example, for a lot of kids, I'll say, after we do our reading and our cuddle time, we're going to have 5 full minutes to go over everything, every question you have, a sip of water, going potty, all the things you need to do. But when the 5 minutes are up, because it's never going to be enough time, right? It's always 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, but you have to stick to the limit, knowing it's never going to be enough. And you say, and then I'm going to say goodnight. And I totally get if you don't like the rule. And if you need to be unhappy about it, that's totally fine. But I'm going to stick to the limit because that's my job. So like writ large, that is what I would do about a bedtime scenario. It's not appropriate for them to decide when the right time is for them to go to bed. The nap is another issue. And again, there's a lot of information I would need, but I would say that if you have ascertained that your child still needs a nap, then again, I would do something like this. Sweetie, I know you don't want to go down for a nap. It's your body. I can't make you sleep. Only you can get your body to sleep, but we have quiet time every day. And it's going to be, from 3 to 3:45 or whatever it is. And you don't have to agree with it. I understand you don't like it, but there's books in here. This is not punishment. This is your time to either play quietly on your own. And if your body needs to go to sleep, it will go to sleep. Because I find that if you actually create the time and a child really needs to sleep, and you stick to that time and they know you're not coming back for 45 minutes or an hour, many kids end up falling asleep. And I will also tell you that this is one of the greatest gifts you give to your children. No child is going to ask for quiet time, and most of them are going to protest it. And you may go through a couple days of screaming for 20 or 30 minutes about how they're bored and miserable and they can't survive this. But if you stick to it and you do it every day, and that's what they come to expect, amazing things happens for these kids. Either they sleep because they need to, or they learn how to entertain themselves and you get a break. It's a total win-win. It is not harmful. 45 minutes of your child protesting because they don't want quiet time is not harmful to them. And the payoff when you stick to it and they adapt. And by the way, for most kids, when you stick to it, you stay calm and loving. You accept that they don't like it, but you tell them it's still something you're going to do. Just like when they tell you that they don't want to be strapped into a car seat, you would never say, okay, you don't have to be. You say, I get it, sweetie. It's really uncomfortable for you to be strapped in. You don't like that feeling, but it's a have to. And, I know it's uncomfortable, but you'll be okay. And they are okay. So they have to kind of live through the experience that they're either fearing or they're uncomfortable with in order to come out on the other side and see that they actually survived it. So again, I know I went far afield with the quiet time and all that, but maybe there was a new gem in there for somebody.
There's lots of gems in there. Thank you, Claire. So we have time for one more question from a parent, if there's one out there. again, feel free to chat it.
In the heat of a power struggle, let's say bedtime, brush your teeth, da, 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 da. My son already knows what to do, but would say at times, I don't know if this is the right way to brush my teeth. I hesitate to be a helper because it seems like he takes that choice all the time and worry it won't foster his independence. Okay. So again, that's a little bit tricky because I'm not sure what meaning that behavior has. Like a lot of when I'm working with families, the very first thing we're doing is trying to figure out, is this an attention thing? Is this a lack of confidence thing? Is this an obfuscation thing? And I don't know what we're dealing with right here. So I guess what I would do is something like this, given your specific situation. I might say to your child, so here's the deal, bud. You are an amazing kid and you are so great at taking care of so many things. And I would point out all the things he takes care of. And because sometimes at toothbrushing time, you're not sure, we're just going to do a whole practice session. I'm big on practice sessions, like outside the moment, not when it's time to brush teeth, but on a Saturday afternoon, you just go through a practice session. And usually kids love it because it's like pretend, right? It's divorced from all of the sort of power struggle, getting through a nighttime routine issue. And then honestly, what I would do if you feel like either it's a confidence issue or it's a attention issue, I would just say, this is your 5 minutes and it's your job. And I have total confidence that you'll do it. And I would give them the space to do it, because usually what happens is when you move on and you don't sort of get involved, that's when they take on the responsibility. So if he says, I don't know if this is the right way to brush my teeth, I may say, oh, how could you find that out? Should we go to a YouTube video? Let's see the right way. So I would sort of lean into it and not sort of get reactive and just take over and start doing it for him.
Awesome. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, it's good to have the real example in there. And like you said, for each of those, Claire, there's a global answer that's possible to give in the forum here, and then lots more specifics that are required. And Claire, there's one phrase that I wanted to sort of close out with, and then sort of self-refer back to the Gan, and then I'll give you a chance to offer any closing remarks. There's one phrase, as I've been taking notes, Claire, that I keep circling because you come back to it: stick to it. There's this notion that you have for us here of staying with the limit, of sticking with it, even after a couple days, a couple sort of trials of tears and of tantrums, and knowing that if you stick to it, there is that outcome that you want. And so I offered to our parents in attendance here, along with Darcy and Stephanie as my partners and colleagues in this, that sticking to it is the hard part, right? Doing it once is the easy part, but then seeing the tantrum and folding the next time to avoid the tantrum, that's where it gets really hard. And so a phrase that you guys in the Gan will often hear me say to our Gan families is that parenting is hard, and it's a little less hard when we do it together. And so our hope is through events like this evening with Claire, and through the services that Stephanie offers through Gan HaNeshama and the programs that Darcy offers through the Family Center, Gan HaMishpacha, that we can remember with each other how to stick to it, right? And come back to each other with our frustrations and our trials and our errors and our grievances. Because I know that if we're just stuck at home in the isolated nuclear family, sticking to it is so hard. But we have each other in the synagogue, in our preschool, in our centers, to stick to it, to sort of hold each other accountable and to keep each other uplifted around the way. So I'll end my portion of it there. Claire, if there are final words or final wisdom that you'd like to share with us, please, the floor is yours.
Well, it reminds me, I'm going to leave you guys with another story, because of course the stories are endless when you do this all day long for 30 years. Right. So, and that's one, by the way, one thing I love about the book is that parents say, like, it's so validating when they see story after story of the madness that takes place in homes, with CEOs who run companies and are completely in charge. And then, you hear these stories about the child running in and out of their bedroom for hours at bedtime with, zero limits, and everyone sort of getting, out of their minds. So that's one of these families. major bedtime issues. It was just epic chaos, parents angry, bribing, cajoling a child to stay in his room at night. You know, he'd keep coming in and out. They would, you know, keep pulling him back in. He would say, oh my God, you're hurting me. They'd be like, oh my God, we're hurting him. And like the next thing you know, he's in their bed, right? The whole thing falls apart. So we finally, like, I helped them see that actually what was happening, like they're trying to avoid the tantrum that would ensue when they put a limit on bedtime, that what was happening was way more detrimental than setting a clear limit, right? So we went through the whole process. We made a great bedtime routine. We explained to the child he had two great choices. If he wants the door open, he stays in his room because that's the rule. If he chooses to come out, no problem. We'll put up Mr. Gate. Mr. Gate is a helper. It helps him stay in his room. And the first night, the parents were both attorneys. The first night, he starts screaming. And by the way, I was there to help them sort of talk them off the ledge, right? So we're downstairs, we're watching this all on video. I am so happy. In my day and age, video did not exist because it's a double-edged sword, but we're watching. Right. And in this case, it was good because they could see like nothing horrible was happening, except that he was having an epic meltdown, screaming, throwing all his toys out of the room. You need to come back. If you don't let me out, you know, I'm never going to go to sleep. And finally, his sort of, you know, final effort was screaming. It's illegal to ignore your child, right? So at that point, they were pretty much done. And what I said to them is, what's the alternative? If you go up now, first of all, we're teaching him that if he throws a big enough fit, right, goes in the win column, and you're letting him know that you don't believe he can manage this and learn to get himself to sleep. And you're back to these protracted, horrible power struggles where you're hating on your child, and he needs you to be his rock and to be loving and calm. And so they stayed the course. And within the first night, he fell asleep at the base of the gate, which, by the way, my son did too, when I had to do a sleep training for him when his sister was born and he was having none of it. And he eventually, after day 3, no problem, going to bed, life-changing for everybody. But every night, he still screamed his head off for 5 full minutes, weeks after they had done this intervention. They never went back in. He always fell asleep. He slept through the night. He woke up in the morning happy, but every night he still screamed for 5 full minutes. The parents were concerned. They called me. It was to no detriment to him. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There were no reasons to be worried. And like on day 32, he just stopped. So my point is, like, these kids have their own path. Don't fear the tantrum. The tantrum is just their way of saying, right now, I'm having a hard time accepting this limit. But when you have faith in them, they are so much more competent than you think they are. And the boundary is what enables them to find their competence. So that's what I'm going to leave you with.
The boundary is what enables them to find their confidence. It's a wonderful sentiment to close on, and it certainly encapsulates a lot of what is available for our parents in the book. So thank you, Claire, for spending the evening with us. Thank you, Stephanie and Darcy, for setting the context for this. Thank you to our families for dealing with bedtimes while you were here with us. I know there's always a lot going on in your homes. Stephanie, last words, you want to close us out?
Sure. Well, I just want to mention, I did put Claire's website in the chat, and we have plenty of books for purchase if you're interested. We have a whole box full of them at the Gan. You can just email me or Darcy or Noah and let us know, and we'll make sure you get one.
All right, everybody. With that, we will conclude our session for this evening. Thank you again
so
for
much.
Our participants. We'll see you guys around.
All right. Thanks for having me. Good night, everybody. Your kids are very lucky. If you actually stayed on instead of having your glass of wine and you know, watching, you know, the newsroom or whatever, it means you're amazing parents if you never want to stop learning and growing. So kudos to you.
Amen. Amen.
Okay. Good night.
Good
Thanks
night.
so much.
Good night.
Good
Claire.
night.